In simple words, those who cut corners or those who are sloppy, let alone those who are fraudulent, can publish more, faster, compared to diligent scientists who take more effort and are more scrutinizing and self-critical. Good evening. About 20 years ago, in 2005, I published a paper with the title, Why Most Published Research Findings Are False. So today I will be adding the word still and trying to convince you that this is still the case. Perhaps a little better, or perhaps a little worse, or much worse. Now, in saying so, I need to disclose that my main conflicts of interest is that I'm studying biases. Therefore, it is likely that I'm very biased. And since I published that paper, my own work may also be wrong, so don't take what I say for granted. I think we are on a safe footing for the scientific method in that regard. Now, science is the best thing that can happen to humans. I say that again and again. Most scientific research, nevertheless, is not up to par in terms of reproducibility, research practices. We use suboptimal research practices. Science is very massive. It's becoming far more massive compared to 20 years ago. We have more than 30 million people who are publishing scientific papers, peer-reviewed scientific papers. We have about 200 million scientific papers that have been published already. We have 7 more million published every year. Most of them are advertisements, more like, trust me, I did this work. Here's 5 or 6 pages describing it. But raw data, experimental materials, algorithms, codes, full protocols, these are not usually shared. And probing the credibility of this massive information is clearly not an easy task. Even probing the credibility of a single paper, let alone 200 million papers increasing at 7 million every year. So one way to look at that is to just map the universe of science. And this is one such map that I have been drawing with my colleague, Kevin Boyack. There's many thousands of scientific disciplines. Each one of them is using the scientific method, but they have a different notion, perhaps, of what exactly matters in the scientific method. For example, how important it is to validate something. How many times should I validate it? How will I validate it? How important is it to be skeptical about what I do, even for my own work? Each dot here is a scientific subdiscipline, and most of the universe actually may not be visible. I mean, what I showed you is what is the published. But each one of us may be generating data sets, or some data sets are accumulating themselves while we're sleeping. You know, like I work with electronic health records, I go to sleep, and when I wake up, there's perhaps hundreds of thousands of observations that have accumulated without me doing anything. They just kept coming and growing. Much of that amount of information and all the analysis that can be done or are done remain unpublished. So they're equivalent to the physical universe of unpublished dark matter and dark energy. And, estimates of 5% ordinary matter, published literature, 27% dark matter, 68% dark energy. Dark energy might be all the human aspects, all the behavior aspects, all the narrative aspects of what shapes what we want to publish, what we want to see published eventually in the literature. If single fields improve over time, and I do believe that many, probably most scientific fields are improving on their own over time, actually still the total universe may get worse if the dark matter components and dark energy components increase, and if the least reproducible fields grow at a faster pace. In simple words, those who cut corners or those who are sloppy, let alone those who are fraudulent, can publish more, faster, compared to diligent scientists who take more effort and are more scrutinizing and self-critical and, oh goodness, wake up at night with nightmares, I need to run to the lab or my laptop. So if there's fewer such scientists and more who are incentivized just publish more to get promoted or to get tenure, to get funding, we are in trouble. There's lots of biases out there. Along with my colleague David Chevalerias, many years ago, we mapped 235 biases just in the biomedical literature, and there's more in other fields. This is a heat map of common biases over time. If you see black color, this means very few people are talking about them. If you see white color, it means that they're hot and everybody's talking about them. When people talk about bias in the scientific literature, most of the time, like confounding and selection bias and publication bias, which are very hot, lots of people mention them, It's mostly in the way of, oh, yes, there is confounding bias in epidemiology, but in my work, I took care of that. Or there is publication bias, which is a threat in meta-analysis, but we did it the right way, and we don't think that publication bias is the big problem. So bias is discussed a little bit like an alibi. Oh, yes, we thought about it, but it's not necessarily a problem. Some common features apply to most scientific fields that perform any sort of statistical analysis. Statistical significance, it's a boring nuisance. 96% of the biomedical literature, when we text mine it, all these millions of papers, they claim significant results. In their abstracts, if they have p-values 96% of the time, they have significant results. In their full text, same thing. When R.A. Fisher came up with the notion of using p-values, he said, well, these may help us kind of select some that are more interesting observations versus others. Now everything is significant. So we cannot really make much out of it. What we can make out of it is that if we take that for granted and we go back and we say, under what kind of conditions could we have seen such a flooding of significant results, we realize across very different fields, in medicine, experimental sciences, environmental sciences, psychology, economics, the common denominator is that most of those significant results, if there were no biases, should not have been statistically significant. And we have seen that in great depth. Many teams have looked at thousands and thousands and millions of papers, and we see these patterns that are entirely compatible with huge presence of bias that transforms non-significant results to significant results or suppresses a large number of non-significant results. For example, in economics, that seems to be about 60 to 70% of the literature. There's a new pattern, loving non-significant results. So it's not as prominent yet, but I think that it may grow. For example, studies of toxicity and harms of intervention, sponsors do not want to show significant signals. So if they can say there was no significant evidence for any toxicity from my drug, my biologic, my vaccine, whatever, that's really nice. Non-inferiority studies, regulatory agencies no longer want to see necessarily a new drug being better than an old one. They might say, if you can prove me that it is not significantly worse, much worse than the old one, I'm okay. So again, a non-significant result within the non-inferiority margin will be fine. Or people like me who want to show you that what was a significant signal should not be significant. Watch out, because I have a bias to get a result that is not significant. So probably researchers of that time might be proliferating over the years. Let's try to model that universe, and let's try to see what might be happening. Here's one universe that we create in silico with David Grimes. We have 11 equations, and basically, forget about all the math, just think of 3 types of scientists: the diligent scientists, the sloppy scientists, and the fraudulent scientists. Now, if you ask in surveys, are you sloppy? The answer is almost always no. If you ask, are you fraudulent? Of course, the answer is no. But if you ask the question, are scientists in your immediate environment sloppy? The answer is almost always yes. If you ask the question, are scientists in your immediate environment fraudulent? Well, it's clearly not 0%. So we start with the assumption that fraud is uncommon, let's say less than 1%, and careless scientists maybe are a minority, and most scientists are diligent. And we give opportunities to these scientists now to start working and to get funding. And if they publish, they get more funding, and they create progeny of other scientists who are much like them. Within a number of funding cycles, the careless and the unethical cohort will take over. You don't need 11 differential equations to understand that. Basically, if you can get rewarded for doing less work or doing no work, completely fake, then you will get there faster, you will get more funding, you will get more rewards, you will create more like what you do. And that's happened, will happen, is happening, or maybe our model is completely wrong. What is important is that we find ways to reward the diligent scientists and find ways perhaps to penalize or to catch those who are cutting corners and those who are sloppy. Our effort is not easy because, as I said, science is becoming more complex, more complicated, more convoluted, more difficult to harness. Even a few years ago, I would think, okay, I want to publish in epidemiology. What are the journals that I want to publish in? There's journals that have in their title epidemiology. Probably makes sense. International Journal of Epidemiology, American Journal of Epidemiology, European Journal of Epidemiology, Epidemiology, Journal of Clinical Epidemiology. Each one of these options, I had been fighting for 100 to 200 slots that they were publishing, 200 papers max per year. Now I have the option to go to Megajournals in epidemiology and related fields, and each one of them is publishing more than 2,000 papers per year. Some of them are publishing 7,000 papers per year. Another one, 17,000 papers per year. Some others, 22,000 papers per year. Amazing number of slots. Acceptance rates higher than the traditional journals. You have to pay for that. Well, you have to pay for everything nowadays. Is that literature trustworthy? Maybe yes, maybe no. I mean, I cannot discredit all of these thousands and thousands of papers, but it's becoming easier, at the same time more difficult, but also easier to publish zillions of papers. Even worse, there's predatory journals, which publish 100% of what is submitted to them, and we cannot even map exactly which are the predatory journals. And no journal will come out and say, I'm a predatory journal. And if you try to say, this journal is predatory, probably you end up requiring a good amount of money to defend you in court, some good lawyers. So that's not an easy way to understand what are the predatory journals, but probably most people believe that we have far more predatory journals now than we used to have. What we clearly have far more nowadays than we had 10 or 20 years ago is paper mills. Paper mills, they just create completely fake papers, and they can do that massively. We see now massive retractions of papers where someone has realized that all these hundreds and thousands of papers were just creations of software that created fake papers. There were no data, nothing, and it's just thin air. Are we able to detect paper mills? Not that well. These papers look pretty fine. You just put trust. 6 pages of reasonable material, some good methods and reasonable results and some discussion and some authors. It's not easy to find out that these authors have bought the paper. They have bought the authorship slot. Sometimes you can go online and find in online address $500 for first authorship or $1,000 to get a senior author position. But most of the time you cannot really find any hints. And we can use AI, and some publishers are using AI to try to detect fake papers.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below. Or visit iai.tv for more debates and talks from the world's leading thinkers on today's biggest ideas.